Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight and for remembering that the Susquehanna Group is a group that is composed of volunteers, and we do try to protect the environment in our community. We serve 6 counties stretching from Tioga County in the west to Sullivan County in the east. These general membership meetings are open to the public. They're free. You can attend either at home via Zoom or in person here at the Vestal Public Library. And tonight's meeting is going to feature a presentation by Jeremy Waddell, giving an overview of the Upper Susquehanna Coalition that helps protect the watershed of the Susquehanna River. And he'll also talk about the organization's initiatives and partnerships. You don't have to be a member of Sierra Club to attend, but we do encourage membership as it helps us by providing funding for our activities and lets us know your contact information so we can keep you updated on important matters. The June edition of the Susquehanna Sierra newsletter has been posted to our website. Thank you, Maura, for posting that, and thank you, Jim Taft, for being our editor and writing a story for it as well. You can search the Susquehanna Group of Sierra Club's website, and you'll find recordings of our past meetings, and you'll also be able to find our newsletters. And the website is www.sierraclub.org/Atlantic/Susquehanna. If you would like to write an essay or a poem or something you want to submit, or even some photos for an upcoming newsletter, you can email them to sierraclubsusquehannagroup@gmail.com. Our next newsletter comes out in September, so if you have something that you want to submit for consideration to be published, please send it to our email by August 20th. Now, I do want to mention that the executive committee that helps govern this organization, the Susquehanna Group of Sierra Club, we voted in our last executive committee meeting to endorse Dan Livingston, who is running for Assembly District 123, the 123rd District. And we do take our endorsements seriously. We don't always endorse for primaries, but in this case, because this is so direct representation for our communities in Albany, and the person that served us for so well for so long, Donna Lupardo, is retiring. We figured that this was worth doing the endorsement process, and it's what we do is we review questionnaires that we send out to the candidates, that they answer questions, and they give us what they're proposing to do with policies and what they consider is most important. And then we also review their background, their resume, if they have one, their biography. And then we talk to people too that we know, or if we have our own personal experience with them, and then we make a decision based on that, and we vote to who to endorse. And then our vote goes up to the Sierra Club Atlantic chapter for review. That's the Atlantic chapter covers all of New York State, and they did approve what we said. So that resulted in Dan Livingston being endorsed. Also, I'm wearing this shirt partly because the governor basically wrecked the climate law in the legislative session. She held it hostage with the budget process, and the public didn't really get input, even though the climate law was passed in 2019 with a lot of input from dozens and dozens of different people, and protests and rallies and press conferences to get that climate law passed. And she just undid a lot of that, which is sad and very frustrating, but that's something we're going to have to work on next year to try to recover, and probably even years after that. The other thing I want to mention too that goes along with that is the governor is pushing for nuclear power, which makes no sense. It's toxic, it's too risky, it's the most expensive way to generate grid scale electricity there is. And it leaves a long, contamination that has to be cleaned up if it's where you mine the uranium and process it, and also the nuclear fuel once it's spent has to be stored on site because there is no permanent repository. So that makes every community that has a nuclear power plant also a nuclear fuel, spent fuel storage site, which is also a terrorist target. And anyway, I'm going to stop there. But that's we're going to be involved potentially in a statewide day of action, June 30th, which is to hold a press conference and a protest rally to in these communities. There's 8 communities that have supposedly said yes to the governor in terms of being willing to host a new nuclear power plant. Broome County is one of those communities, which is our community. The heart of Susquehanna Group is in Broome County. Most of our members are in Broome County. So we've already spoken with the county executive. If you don't like that idea, please contact the county executive and tell them so, either by email or by phone. All right. Thank you to all the volunteers, including Christina Fuller, who was the founder of the Move Out Project many years ago. They did a fantastic job this year. They collected 35% more than they did last year. Last year was 34,000 pounds. This year was 36,000 pounds. I mean, 46,000 pounds, sorry, 46,000 pounds. So, I mean, that's a remarkable accomplishment. And that so many people worked so hard, and it's such an intense period in May to do all that, to collect and pick up everything, to sort it, and then to distribute it to charities so it doesn't end up in the landfill. So that's a fantastic organization, and kudos to them. They deserve all the praise you can give them. What else? Also, thank you to Mary Cronk and Scott Laufer, who organized our trip to visit the Bluestone Wind Farm at the eastern end of Broome County. That was a fantastic day. We were lucky with the weather, and the host, Terry Stanley, did a fantastic job answering questions for over an hour. And we were all surprised at how little noise there was from the wind turbine that we were standing right underneath while it was operating and generating electricity. You could talk this softly and you could still hear everybody talk. It was really eye-opening. I had no idea that it was that little noise. So wind farms are a good thing. All right. So I think that leaves me to tonight's special guest, Jeremy Waddell. He's a certified professional in erosion and sediment control. We're thankful that he's here. He's agreed to give us an overview of the Upper Susquehanna Coalition, their initiatives and partnerships. He will also cover the Susquehanna River Basin Commission East Branch Nanticoke Creek Climate Resiliency Project grant that they received that will be resulting in the Julian Shepherd Preserve, which I think is going to be in association with the Southern Tier Land Conservancy. Okay, good. So Jeremy Waddell is originally from upstate New York. He earned a bachelor's degree in wildlife management from SUNY Cobleskill in 2002 and began working for the Upper Susquehanna Coalition in 2006. Prior to working with the USC, he was employed as an environmental scientist for engineering and environmental consulting firms in Virginia and Maine. Jeremy's primary areas of expertise include aquatic resource restoration, regulatory agency permitting and compliance, as well as erosion and sediment control design. Jeremy is currently serving on the board of directors of the Southern Tier Land Conservancy and the New York State Wetlands Forum, where he has served as secretary since 2018. And as I mentioned before, he's a certified professional in erosion and sediment control and lifetime member of the Society of Wetland Scientists. Thank you, Jeremy.
You bet.
All right.
Well, thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. As was indicated, I'm originally from Central New York, and I graduated from SUNY Cobleskill, and I got a degree in wildlife management, and I entered right into the workforce.
Do you want it on?
Oh, no, actually, that's better. And I entered into environmental consulting and engineering firms, where I focused on wetland delineation and stormwater and permitting, things of that nature. And moved back to New York. I was living in Maine, and in 2006, and I got employed by the Upper Susquehanna Coalition, and this year marks my 20th year with the coalition. For those of you who don't know about the coalition, the coalition is comprised of 22 counties in Southern Tier New York and Northeast PA, 22 county soil and water conservation districts that work collaboratively to implement conservation best practices across the watershed. Our watershed is approximately 7,500 square miles. We're 69% forested, roughly 23% ag, 3% urban, 4% aquatic resources. We work with the soil and water conservation districts, who in turn work with the local highway departments, municipalities, agricultural producers and landowners in their county. We rely on the soil and water conservation districts as what we call our local delivery system. Watershed management across a large geographic area is a challenge. It's a challenge to get BMP uptake with landowners. And so what's unique about the USC is our connectivity to the soil and water conservation districts, and how we can target our funding to the counties where the need is the greatest. And once the funding is delivered to the county, we rely on them, as I mentioned, we leverage their relationships that they have. The staff that are in those offices are from that area. They graduated high school with a lot of these people. They see them at the store and at church. And it's those relationships that we leverage so that we can get our best management practices implemented over a wide geographic region. And it's still a challenge, but having that trust and having the relationship with the landowner, with the local soil and water conservation district, has been a key to our success over the years. So the Upper Susquehanna Coalition, we have 4 major areas of focus. We want to support, as soil and water conservation districts do, environmentally and economically sustainable agriculture. Agriculture is the #1 industry in the state of New York. And it's also has a significant environmental footprint associated with it. So things that we can do to minimize that footprint and the effects of that industry, which is critically important on our water resources, is one of our primary goals. And everything from there kind of comes down to our other goals in achieving that outcome. Promoting riparian forest restoration, restoring stream banks, restoring stream corridors, stream bank stabilization, and wetland conservation. All of those practices are sediment and nutrient reducing best practices that we implement within each county to support the broader goals, which are in alignment with the Chesapeake Bay watershed, which are nutrient reduction, sediment reduction, which is water quality improvement, creating habitat to the localized wildlife is also a priority. And supporting sustainable agriculture comes in many different forms. The best practices that we implement on farms are across a wide range, from protecting stream banks on farms and doing sediment reduction, working with livestock, working with fencing livestock out of water resource areas, fencing livestock out of wetlands and streams. And a lot of farmers rely on streams to water their animals. And so typically we have to integrate alternatives. We have to drill wells, put in trough systems. We have to winterize those trough systems so that they can be functional, so that we can keep the livestock out of the water resources. We do winter cover crops. We do precision feeding, rotational grazing. We support covered barnyards and tillage and manure storage. And so some examples of some of the agricultural best practices that are extremely popular and extremely effective are the covered barnyard, the tillage, and the manure storage. This is a no-till drill. I don't know if you're familiar with a no-till drill, but plowing fields and exposing hundreds of acres of exposed soil to runoff is a combination for sediment and soil loss to our watershed. What the no-till drill does is it sows the seed to a certain depth that you can calibrate, and it does not require chisel plowing or plainboard plowing, which are your traditional, methods of seeding a field. This reduces the sediment and the phosphorus and nitrogen that's in that sediment, and it keeps those nutrients on the ground, and it improves soil health. And so from a farming perspective, the farmer is an advocate of this as well, because they have better yield and they have better soil health on their farm, and they're not losing those nutrients to runoff. Same with manure storage. If we can get farmers to stop winter spreading. So when manure is spread in the wintertime, there's no uptake, there's no vegetative uptake, and the ground's frozen. So all of that manure runs off. And depending on the time of year, and most farmers that don't store their manure, they fill their manure spreader and they spread it in the fields twice a day. And if we can implement a manure storage where the manure is stored during the non-growing season, and then it is applied to their agricultural areas during the growing season, that benefits the plants, it benefits the crop yields, and it benefits the water quality, because we're not seeing all of that nutrient and all that manure in the runoff during the spring snowmelt. And so those basic conservation practices, in addition to other things where if we can't get the farmer to adopt a no-till drill method, we can provide winter cover crops. And we have achieved approximately 100,000 acres of winter cover crops from year in to year out. And a lot of that is funded by grants. A lot of the farmers don't have winter cover crop seed budgets. And so it's not something that they're going to voluntarily, willingly do on their own. If we can provide that for them, and they would then use their machinery and their fuel to spread the cover crop, we provide the seed, then that brings them to a point where they can say yes to that practice. And so it's important that we provide the funding in the watershed. Another thing I forgot to mention earlier was the delivery of the funding varies across the watershed, is widely varied. Broome County, for example, has the most urban area in our watershed. Madison County has the most animal units. And so when we go to target the funding that we receive, we're going to be targeting the funding to the counties that have where the need is the greatest. And that is how a watershed organization can deliver those practices to on the ground practices to the areas where they're needed the most. Riparian restoration is also another critical component of healthy watersheds. On farms and on municipal lands, on ball fields and parks, there's no limit to where a riparian forest buffer can be implemented. If you're adjacent to a water resource and there's no forest cover, then that is a eligible location for a tree planting project. What the riparian forest buffers do is lots of things. They stabilize the stream banks. If you look at areas where there's destabilized stream banks that are laterally migrating, if you look at aerial imagery, they're almost always associated with a lack of mature forest cover type. And you look at areas where there is mature forest cover type and there is no bank erosion. Why? Because of the root systems, vast root systems holding our stream banks together. So when we have row crops that go directly to the edge of the stream, that's where we have the loss of the forest cover type, and we have the loss of that bank stabilization functionality. And so that's one of the functionalities. Another one is the shade. With increasing intensity of sunlight and climate change, we're seeing more and more water temperatures and organisms that are cold water dependent organisms that are being affected thermally through increase in water temperatures. And that can also be attributed to loss of mature canopy cover in the riparian zone. And so by reestablishing that mature forest cover type in that riparian area, we can be putting more shade on the water resource. And then, leaf detritus has been linked to increase in EPT index. So EPT is Ephemeroptera, Plecoptera, Trichoptera, your stonefly, caddisfly, mayfly. Those are the three orders of those, and that is an index that can be a metric to use to measure stream health. In areas where there's more leaf litter and detritus in the stream, you have more of those mayfly, stonefly, caddisflies, and that EPT index is increased, and you're going to have higher stream health in those areas. So those are just three examples of why riparian forest buffers are a huge benefit to our waterways and our watershed. And a lot of times you see these driving down the highway where you see all the tree tubes. And that's essentially what these projects are. And they start out as a bare root seedling in a tree tube, and they mature. And then the tube goes away. And then I've been around long enough to where now I've seen where we have achieved mature forest and canopy closure on what was previously an open field. And also rigorous monitoring. These projects cannot be implemented and then ignored. They need continuous monitoring and mortality analysis and supplemental planting and deer browse evaluation, meadow vole girdling, inspections. All of these things are important to your riparian buffer or your tree planting project having a successful outcome. Restoring stream corridors goes kind of hand in hand with the riparian forest buffers, but in some cases, the eroding, laterally migrating stream bank requires more than tree planting. It requires intervention from a structural standpoint, where we're bringing in a couple different techniques that we have in our toolbox for stream bank stabilization. The oldest traditional one is riprap. And it is effective and it gets the job done, but it's not really that environmentally sound, and it's frowned upon by a lot of the regulatory agency folks. But in some cases, when you're working with where there's a sewer line or a municipal water line or a wing wall to a bridge abutment, there's certain cases where you have to implement the riprap to protect the infrastructure. In other cases, we can use what we call the wood toe technique. Wood toe, or any use of any wood structures, it creates more habitat, it absorbs more energy, and is more environmentally sound methodology of stabilizing stream banks. Sometimes it can become problematic with getting the wood that's required with certain bat regulations that are in place, and it takes some more extra planning and some extra timing and some more coordination, but in the long run, it's worth the extra effort. And here's just a couple stream designs I pulled up that we worked on, the Butternut Creek and Village of Morris, where we worked with Morris Central School District. Most school districts don't have stream bank stabilization line items in their budget. And so when a stream bank is affecting, or there's some water resource issue on a municipal site, like a school or a library or a highway department, they are in search of funding to help them deal with the problem that they have. And this particular case was in Morris Central School. The butternut had eroded was eroding significant portions of their property. So from our perspective, this was this massive source of sediment that needed to be stabilized. And the school district was losing acreage and eroding, into their property. And so that's where we can come in with our funding and provide technical assistance in the engineering. We have an engineering team in our staff, and we provide the engineering, the survey, the design, the oversight, all the way through implementation and through permitting for a lot of these projects. This is another one, East Branch of Wego Creek, the Zabracki Farm, Newark Valley. We're going to be working on that one here in a couple weeks. Delivering wetland conservation is my major area of expertise. Been a wetlands biologist now for 20 years. I focused in the beginning of my career a lot on compensatory mitigation, and now I'm working with what we call volunteer projects with the grant funding. And so the funding that with compensatory mitigation, there's a wetland that's been destroyed at some point in the course of the funding. And so it's kind of a wash. It's a no net gain for the watershed. If someone is decimating a 1 acre wetland over here and we're restoring a 1 acre wetland over here, that's great that we haven't lost that 1 acre of wetland, but we haven't gained any for the watershed. Post-industrial revolution, they say New York State has lost 60% of its naturally occurring wetlands. And so having a no net gain project isn't benefiting the watershed. It's great that we have the Clean Water Act, and it's great that private sector companies who impact wetlands are required to mitigate. That's great. But the funding that we receive is not tied to any impact, and it's for the increase of wetland acreage in the watershed. We're trying to get back at that 60% that we lost post-industrial revolution. Clean Water Act 1974, post-industrial revolution, many years, decades prior to that. So there was a period of time when we had mechanized agriculture that preceded the Clean Water Act, where there was a lot of wetlands lost during that time. Outreach and education is another really important component of all of our programs. We have an outreach committee. I am conducting outreach as we speak. There's funding available for our staff to do meetings like this, to spread the word about our programs, and also to maybe engage with landowners. Is there a landowner in the room that owns 100 acres in the Susquehanna watershed that wants to talk to me after this meeting about implementing sediment and nutrient reducing best practices on their property? That's what I want to have happen. And it typically does. And sometimes it does happen. And sometimes we pick up cooperating landowners as a result of our outreach activities. But nevertheless, we have the ability to just spread our message and kind of highlight the work that we're doing. Some of the some before and afters some projects I've done over the years. This one here on the left is an 18-hole golf course in Shenango County in New Berlin. It was a 130-acre property. We restored 52 acres of wetlands. And this is a kind of an older photo. I wish I had a better after photo because it's probably 70% forested now. And it just was turf grass prior to that. And then on our right, this is Route 414 north of Corning. And this was a project that was emergent marsh in the center. And then off to the left, there was some forested restoration in the Post Creek watershed. Just off the screen there is Post Creek, which is a trout stream in Steuben County. And we also do smaller scale projects. We do vernal pool projects and small aquatic resource restoration. We do wetland enhancement projects where we're replanting shrub or forest cover type. There might be an area where it has existing hydric soil and it has some hydrophytic vegetation, but looking back at old aerial photos, which is something we do to kind of create a timeline of chronology of the site and what has occurred there throughout the decades, and you can see where there's historic ag and what might have been a scrub shrub or a forested wetland that was cleared and farmed, and then the farm was abandoned in the 70s or the 80s, and then now it's reverting. And it might just be invasive species. It might be honeysuckle and autumn olive and some hydrophytic vegetation. And so technically it meets the definition of a wetland. If you were delineating it, it meets the definition of wetland, but it's not an optimal cover type. And it's certainly not something that probably occurred there, prior to the loss of the cover type. And so those types of projects where we can go in and plant heavily shrub or forest or a combination of shrub and forest cover type, and those are considered more of a wetland enhancement project. Which leads me to the East Branch Nanticoke Creek project that I wanted to highlight here tonight. That I was lucky enough to pull this off with Southern Tier Land Conservancy and the Susquehanna River Basin Commission. So the Susquehanna River Basin Commission has what they call a consumptive use mitigation program. And it's a big fund that they have, and it's tied to the natural gas industry. So when they do hydrofracking and they're withdrawing water from the river, they pay a fee to the SRBC that goes into a big pot of money, and people can apply to receive that funding to implement various projects across the watershed in the areas that they have identified as their priority areas. And so we've worked on numerous occasions with the SRBC on this types of projects. We have a project in the Mud Creek watershed in Steuben County that we're going to be donating. That was a 220-acre property we're donating to the DEC. The Finger Lakes Trail goes through there, has a lot of frontage on Mud Creek, and we're doing a lot of wetlands restoration there. That was an acquisition project with restoration and then conveying to DEC. We also did a project with the Shenango Greenway in the city of Norwich. And we're again with SRBC, where we're reestablished about 30 acres of wetlands, and we did a large wood tow bank stabilization project on the Shenango River. And this is our third project with the SRBC, is this East Branch Nanticoke Creek project. And I had worked on this site many years ago. The main impoundment here is man-made. There's a concrete spillway at the south end of the impoundment. And it was a WRP site through USDA Wetland Reserve Program. And back in 2014, the district conservationist in Broome County, Lena Steele, contacted me and said, hey, the concrete spillway needs some maintenance, and we need to bring some rock down there. It's eroding around the edges, and the beavers had it completely plugged. So we got hired to go down there in 2014 and do some maintenance, and didn't think anything of it. It was just a small maintenance project that we got hired by USDA to do, and we went in there and we got it accomplished. Well, then fast forward to 2025, and I see this property is for sale. And at the same time, I had gotten on the board of the Southern Tier Land Conservancy, and we were talking about who is a brand new conservancy without any preserved land until now. And I showed this as an example of a parcel that's for sale that we could build a grant proposal around. A lot of the grant proposals require that you are specific. You can't just talk in the abstract about conserving land. They want an address. They want how many acres is it? How many acres are you of this, and how many acres of wetlands are you going to restore? How many acres of forest are you going to create? So it has to be very specific. And it just so happened that Julian Shepherd, a Binghamton University professor, had created a list of high priority resource areas in Broome County that he identified as being a priority for conservation. This happened to be one of them. And just ironically, and it was a place where he had been taking Binghamton University students for a decade. And he knew the previous landowner, and they gave him permission to go down and to treat it as an outdoor classroom space. And so that was kind of really neat that came together, and then everyone was in agreement that we should move forward with building a proposal around this property that was for sale, which is easier said than done. We had to get the sellers to sign an MOU because the grant process takes a long time. It's not your traditional land purchase timeline. We had to set up an MOU with STLC saying that they would take the land. I had to get an appraisal done, provide the appraisal report. We packaged it all up and we shipped it out to the SRBC and they funded it, $330,000. And so we were able to acquire the property. And right now, Tioga County Soil and Water, who I work for, is the main administrative body of the Upper Susquehanna Coalition. Even though we cover a 22 county area, we have to be administered by an entity. And so Tioga County is that entity. And as you can see, there's a 25-acre impoundment with a concrete spillway that, when maintained, has the ability to store 25 million gallons of water during storm events. So from a climate resiliency standpoint, that was one of the points that we made, that it has the ability to store and to retain and detain flood flows. And there was also, forest preservation, 14 acres, riparian preservation, 23 acres. So that is all existing intact forest that is going to remain mature intact forest in perpetuity. We're conveying this land to the Southern Tier Land Conservancy, and we're going to be placing a restricted covenant on the deed. It's about the same thing as a conservation easement, but with less strings attached. There will never be any logging that will be permitted on this property. And so the carbon sequestration piece is the other component of the climate resiliency. Mature forest is where our carbon sequestration is occurring. We're creating new forests. We're going to be preserving wetlands, and we're enhancing wetlands. We're creating 14 acres of new forest. We're restoring 2 acres of wetlands. You see in the map here, obviously this is the impoundment. These are areas of, in the blue shaded areas are areas of wetland restoration. This hatching here is going to be all riparian reforestation. And we're in the process of going through the planting plan right now, and we're going to be putting the planting out to bid. We're going to be installing about 5,000 stems. And we're going to be continuing to do some more wetlands restoration. We were out there just this spring. We've been active at this site for the last couple months. And so some of the stuff that we've been doing so far is we put in a parking area. We can park about 4 cars. It's off of Edwards Hill Road in Lisle. And this was all paid for with the grant. We were able to get some loads of stone in there and make it so it was accessible, because prior to the installation of the parking area, there was no place to park. You just had to pull off the road. We also installed a high tensile fence all across down the whole length of Edwards Hill Road. That's for the 2-legged wildlife, keeping people out of there with their ATVs and their pickup trucks. And there's people hunting. There's tree stands back there, and things like that. There's a snowmobile trail that goes through the property. And we are continuing to maintain that agreement with the Lisle Snowmobile Club. It was important for us to maintain and have that relationship with the locals. And the last thing we wanted to do was create any type of discontent with the local community. And so I'm not necessarily an advocate of having a snowmobile trail on the property, but given the kind of community outreach aspect of it, it makes a lot of sense for us to do that. And then we installed some aquatic habitat there this spring. We put in 6 total wetlands. We had 2 larger, what we would consider pothole wetlands on the right, probably more 50 feet crossed or so. And then smaller aquatic resources that we kind of we call vernal pools, but I use that term loosely because vernal meaning ephemeral. These are not ephemeral. These are perennial pools. To mimic the hydro period of an ephemeral wetland is nearly impossible. And there's a lot of annual variability in rainfall and drought, and so amphibian reproduction, we want that to be a guaranteed. So we're going to create these perennial woodland pools. Is more a better definite characterization of what they actually are. And that's all I got for you tonight. Anybody have any questions?
Yes. So, yes, that's a good idea. So I got a few questions. One, thank you for, I think it looks like 80 acres total for this Julian Shepherd Preserve that's being created. Does that sound right?
Oh, it's 117 acre property.
117 acres.
Yep, 117 acre property.
Okay, wow.
Yep.
Fantastic. $330,000. Where is that money coming from? Is it federal, state, a combination?
It's from the SRBC. So the Susquehanna River Basin Commission is an NGO. They're not governmental, and they're not non-for-profit either. They exist mostly in Pennsylvania, but like I said, they take in income from water withdrawal from the river, and then they have this revolving fund that you can apply to get funding for. So we had the property was 211,000, and then the balance is going to be all the stuff that the fence, the parking, the 5,000 trees and shrubs and the wetlands and all that is all in the monitoring. So we're going to continue to monitor and conduct mortality analysis and replant, do supplemental plantings for probably about 5 years. There's also a lot of mowing that has to occur in around the tree tubes, and so that's part of the maintenance and monitoring that will occur, for multiple years after.
Okay, and you mentioned the gas industry is contributing a lot to this. Is there other sources of money that goes into the Susquehanna River Basin Commission funds as well, or?
Not sure. This is the consumptive use mitigation program. I don't know how, where they get all their funding from, okay, but I'm sure it's not solely from the consumptive use,
Okay.
But
all the different states, Susquehanna Watershed contribute
to the SRBC.
Yeah,
I'm not entirely up to speed on how SRBC gets their funding. I can tell you, and I did skip over on USC's funding. We take in, we're soft funded, and so we operate under right now probably about 15 different grants, state and federal. So we received 2 really nice grants through the Chesapeake Wild, which is the Watershed Investments for Landscape Defense. We received grants through the EPA, from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. We received grants through the DEC, and we received grants from like SRBC. And so those are tied to, where they're putting out an RFP. So an RFP goes out, a request for proposals go out, and they're seeking proposals to come in to achieve certain goals. And if we don't apply for it, someone else will. So,
yeah, I'll get back to the problem. I have a couple of questions about when you were talking about just in general riparian repair and restoration and shade for waterways. I remember reading about how at Yellowstone, when they introduced wolves that reduced the elk and the mule deer population, and that the trees started growing along the Yellowstone again, and the trout started reappearing, and basically the Yellowstone River was restored by the introduction of wolves into the ecosystem. So I'm wondering, to the extent that deer contribute to a similar problem in the waterways around here.
It's an interesting question. I would say yes and no. You look at a lot of the tree species that occupy our bottomland areas are not palatable to deer. Immediately, the one that comes to mind is sycamore. Sycamores are in every one of our floodplains across the state. They're one of our most prolific floodplain tree. You usually don't find sycamores anywhere else but the floodplain. Same with silver maple, same with black willow. And deer don't browse those trees. You know, I planted enough of them to know what deer browse and what they don't browse. They will browse the silver maple. But that's an interesting theory. And a lot of our ecotypes are based off of deer palatability. You know, that's why we see the multiflora rose and the honeysuckle and the autumn olive, and well, where are all the native stuff? Well, it's all getting, you know, it's all getting buzzed off, you know, from the deer browse. And so I often wonder, you know, what the regeneration would look like, and a lot of the investments we make in our shelters, our tree tubes, and we do deer fencing. And so those areas where we put in the deer fence, you have the seed bank response and the natural regeneration is as it should be. You know, it's not being influenced by the deer browse. If we do tree tubes, then all of the seed bank response and natural regen that occurs outside of the tree tubes are all being browsed on. So you get a different outcome in that case. You know, so you can't ignore deer browse, and it's something that you have to plan for, and you have to make those investments. Otherwise, you're just not going to have that outcome that you want.
With respect to the project, I understand it. The 22 acres is under an easement from by USDA. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And to get the picture on the map back up. Of the 117 acres, where is the 22? Just behind the dam, or where?
The 22 acres is just the impoundment, and that's a 22. That's a 22-acre impoundment.
And does the dam have an official name, R17-04, or what? Is there a name for that dam?
No, it's a Class A dam, which is a non-regulated dam. If it was a Class B or a C dam, we wouldn't have purchased this property. You know, because we have dealt with a lot of dams. You have to deal with DEC dam safety. There needs to be engineering reports that need to be conducted on a semi-annual basis, and so those types of dams. And working with land trusts, a lot of times people are eager to want to donate properties that have really cumbersome legal dams on them. And so that's always something you got to watch out for. And it should be on whenever there's a dam on a property and somebody's trying to donate it. It should be alarming, because what's the engineering requirements? What's the status of the dam? You know, all of those questions come into mind, and what's the cost going to be? You know, and that's usually the motivation of why they're trying to donate it in the first place.
So how does the USDA refer to their original project?
I think that they probably have a easement number.
Easement.
There's an easement. I have a copy of the easement. It's a perpetual easement through USDA, and I'm sure there's probably some number associated with it that they use to code it. Yeah.
You're obviously what's the number,
right? Yeah. Go ahead.
Do you have any plan for this? What's out there? If you have an idea of what field trips and stuff, what we might see? Is there a plan for this other than Julian's?
I don't have a formal inventory of everything that's out there. It would be great to start something like that. Just informally, we've been developing our planting plan, and we've kind of developing 5 dominant shrubs and 5 dominant trees that are in the area that we want to plant. And what's really unique about this area is there's some really unique species, and I spent a lot of time in the woods and in the field. And this has the most concentration of high bush and low bush blueberry, mature high bush and low bush blueberry that I've ever seen anywhere in Broome County. And there's not a lot of invasive species, which is indicative of being higher up in the watershed. Invasive species kind of have that bottleneck the further you go down the watershed, the more seed dispersal release you're going to get. The further down the watershed you go, higher up in the watershed, it's always a shame to see invasives up there because that they were brought there by somebody, and they weren't just seed dispersal. And so this has some autumn olive, it has some honeysuckle, and it has some multiflora rose in some of the fallow field areas. And we've been going through as part of our planting prep work, and we are grubbing those out, mechanically removing them, creating brush piles. But there's not a lot, there's not a ton of it. And what is there, we've been removing. There's some really nice large shagbark on this side on the west side of the dam. This side of the property is going to be really difficult to access, so it's not really going to be open to the public. So right now there's some trails that are going around, and right now we're working on creating a water's edge trail around, making a big loop trail. But there won't be any formal trail system to this side of the property.
That's okay. Just hearing that, I was like our picketing and it's more like maybe twin laws and things like that that are getting spaced out. So just know that plants are there.
Mm-hmm.
And with the deer browse, I'm finding that it's changing generation by generation of deer. Like they used to eat my buttonbush. Now they don't, and they're eating the alder, which they never ate. So it's like it's hard to plant that way. As far as I don't know what's happening that way. Why different generations like different things.
Yeah, it makes you wonder sometimes. What makes me wonder sometimes is there was an old CRP project, which is Conservation Reserve Program. So Walter Wright, who was the farmer, was very involved with federally funded programs like WRP and the CREP program, the CREP program. And so the CREP program that was implemented up in the far reaches of this blue line all the way up to the top. And there's some really nice buttonbush that they planted, but then they planted rows and rows of streamco willow. And it's all just this monoculture of streamco willow on one side of the creek. And then on the other side of the creek, it's a monoculture of larch. And so I think I kind of it makes me chuckle why somebody would have designed that at the time. And then there's a bunch of ash. But even if it was, why would you monoculture them and have all the larch here and all the streamco here? It just makes more sense to just mix them together and have them more, sporadic and looks more natural. But if I didn't point it out to you, most people wouldn't even realize that was a previously planted area. But a lot of buttonbush, a lot of hawthorn. There's a lot of hawthorn that's naturally occurring through here. So it's going to be really nice. And then of course you get everything, your red osier dogwood and your silky dogwood and that kind of stuff is all but that stuff's getting really browsed pretty heavily.
Where is this?
It's on Edwards Hill Road in Lisle.
Edwards Hill Road in Lisle, off of what highway?
If you're going up 26, right before the Whitaker farm, right before Ford Hill Gulf, you take a left, you go up the hill, it's up there.
Okay.
So if you're going 26 north towards Whitney Point, right before Fort Hill, it's on the left, go up. And then there's a great blue heron rookery that's in the wetland right now. And the other day I was down there, I walked down to the dam, and I flushed a bald eagle who was perched on one of the big Norway spruce. So it's definitely being utilized by a lot of wildlife.
Regarding the reforestation and the lower invasive species, are you personally doing all that, or is that? I just want to know like what percent of your job is doing stuff like that.
So what's unique about USC is how we internalize everything. So the answer to your question is yes, we do it because a couple of reasons. When you hire contractors, when you work for a municipality or a public entity, you have to go through what's called procurement. So if I wanted to hire a contractor to come out with a Fecon mower to go and to mulch and to masticate all of the invasive species with this skid steer with this big mower on the front of it that we have, I would have to put that out to bid. I'd have to run an ad in the newspaper. I'd have to have a bid opening, and we'd have to pay significantly more than what it would cost us to do it ourselves. So we own 3 excavators, a bulldozer, a skid steer, a dump truck, and we have all this equipment that we use to implement these projects because this conservation funding is so scarce. And once you have it, the last thing you want to do is be overpaying a lot of money to contractors that you might have to be even paying prevailing wage. And so we've learned that to get the best bang for our conservation buck is to have all of that capacity internally. And if we don't have something, we rent something. And so, if we were out here, I showed these photographs. So that's our skid steer, that Kubota. That's our excavator, John Deere 75 excavator. I hired Lockheed to come out and bring me some rock. I'm standing there taking the photograph. And so a large part of my job is overseeing the implementation of these types of projects, and making sure that they're being implemented properly. So we essentially take on that contractor role at that point. And the same thing why we wanted to increase our capacity in the engineering field. Hiring private engineering firms is extremely expensive. And if we could have, our engineers could design 3 or 4 projects for the cost of 1 project. So when we're talking about implementing conservation, sediment, nutrient reducing best practices across the watershed, the best way to do that is to take it on yourself. Now, that's not always the case. And oftentimes we are hiring, if we're working way up near Cooperstown, Susquehanna River Watershed's a big area, from Cooperstown to Bath. And so, there's folks out in Steuben County, and we have contractors that we work with that we know are really good. But a lot of that stuff still has to go out to bid, and we have to put together bid packages and things like that. So the more that we can internalize, the better off we are. In the soil and water conservation districts themselves, they have, like I showed you, that no-till drill. Each district owns their own drill, and they rent it out to the farmers. I didn't mention that. Each district owns the drill, and if say Broome doesn't have a drill, Tioga's got a drill. If there's a farmer in Broome that wants a drill, they get the Tioga drill, and it's a very small rental fee. And then same with our hydroseeding program. We work with municipalities. We have grants that do cost shares. So when the municipality's out there digging the ditches out, and then we're introducing all of our storm water into freshly excavated ditches, that creates chocolate milk water that goes into the creek. That's not the best case scenario that we want our municipalities doing. So after they're maintaining the ditches and they're digging the ditches out, then we can come in with our cost share and we can hydroseed those ditches. And reestablishing that vegetative cover is one of the primary, erosion and sediment control practices that there is to stabilize the soil, is to revegetate it.
You mentioned an MOU between USC and ST also.
Yep.
Has that been signed?
Oh yeah. We had to provide a copy of the MOU before they awarded the grant. So SRBC needed to say that we needed to show them that there was a third party that was going to take this, and it couldn't be hypothetical. Like, they wanted to see an MOU. We had to have an MOU with the sellers. They weren't going to award us the grant money unless they guaranteed that the sellers were going to accept the appraised value. So we had to put it all together way ahead of time. So right now it's with the attorney in Owego, and she's drafting the restricted covenant, and everything's ready to go to be transferred. It's just whenever she can schedule the closing. I imagine it's going to be, a month or so.
And so the deed is still being worked out, but the MOU is already signed.
Correct. Yeah.
And I'm just curious, in the east side of the impoundment is where the trails are going to be.
Yes.
Is that true also with the snowmobile trail?
No, the snowmobile trail actually just cuts this very small corner. It goes from here to here. Goes up into this field, goes towards Lyle, and then it goes out to the road. So that's it. And there's a culvert pipe right here, which is, I wanted to take out. That's the, culvert pipes are restoration, low hanging fruit. It's a riparian restoration, a stream restoration, and if it's a perched outlet, then you have aquatic organism passage issue. And so by taking culverts out, it's a great method of restoration in a lot of different ways. But it would have negated the snowmobile trail. We could build a bridge or something, but that would be really expensive. And so that was kind of one of the concessions we made, is to say, well, we'll just leave the culvert pipe in there for now. Let them have their snowmobile trail.
Do snowmobilers litter? I imagine occasionally a beer can will be.
You betcha.
Yeah.
And is the land otherwise going to be posted for other hunting, fishing, trapping?
Yep, I created a posted sign. Got some out in the truck, but it's no hunting, no fishing, no trapping, no firearms, no fires, no camping, no motorized vehicles, no cutting of wood, no removal of, it goes on and on.
Except for the snowmobile.
Yeah, except for that, yeah. But other than that, it's open. It's open to the public on foot during daylight hours, and those signs are up right now. So I don't think it's getting a lot of use. Not a lot of people know about it. And we're also going to be talking this week. Friday, we have our Southern Tier Land Conservancy board meeting. We're going to be talking about the kiosk. So that's going to be another next step. Is at some point around that parking area where we decide to put it, we're going to put a kiosk with a map. And the map will show the trails, and there'll probably be a blue trail and a red trail and a white trail. And we're going to put reflective trail markers up, so if first responders ever need to get in there, during the dark, they would have reflective trails for their flashlights, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, it's pretty important, especially if somebody goes missing, and you get a forest ranger that has never been here before, and you say, we think the person's on the white trail, they go with their flashlight, and that's a major safety thing for public use.
You mentioned several times something you call wood tow in terms of trying to stabilize the stream bank. What does that mean? How does that work?
So it's a 20-foot tree that's no less than 15 inches in diameter, with the root wad attached. So when you go to source them, you have to knock over the tree with an excavator, grab the hold of the tree and shake the dirt off of the root wad. And the root wad could be, something like really big, twice the size of this table. And then you place the root wad in the bank facing upstream at an angle, and you bury the 20 feet of stem 20 feet into the bank. Then you take the tops of the trees and you lay them perpendicular as slash. And then you do this in layers, and you move it back up the bank in kind of in a terraced form with coconut logs and coconut fabric and willows. So it creates this massive amount of woody debris that's very strategically placed, and it does not become unraveled. I don't know if you've ever had where you had a pile of dirt where there's all sticks and stuff in it and tried to dig into it with a shovel. Good luck, because just that little bit of wood mixed in with the dirt really holds it together. And then you got the willows and then a heavy seeding. And it really is really effective method. It's just really expensive because you have to source the trees. And so it also doesn't make a lot of sense. And it was always really popular during after a flood event, during flood triage, because you would have these whole trees everywhere.
Already washed. Yeah, I've seen it happen.
They're shoved underneath bridges and in culvert pipes, and the water's flowing
on the road anyway.
So we were out there we're pulling all this woody debris out of all of these bridges and culverts and stuff. And then, well, what are you going to do with all this woody debris? Well, you might as well use it, put it in the banks. So that's where it kind of spawned from. But during a non-flood situation, you have to be careful of clear cutting and knocking down trees if there's a bat presence. Now we have the northern long-eared bat, now we have the tricolored bat and the little brown bat there. So there's certain steps you need to take to make sure that you're conserving the habitat, and Another thing that you can do is a lot of these grants require landowner match. And so if you can go around and selectively remove trees from their property, you can use that as their contribution. You can use that as match.
So they can estimate a dollar value if they sold it for lumber and instead they gave it.
No, even way more than that. I can estimate how much it would cost to get one of those delivered to the site for my job.
Oh,
Because if traditionally you have to come on a cherry picker truck, and with the root rod attached, it's a lot of weight.
yeah.
So you only can get about 6 trees per picker truck. So it's very expensive to get them delivered to your job site. So whatever it would cost me to get that tree with the root rod attached to the job site is what I use as match.
Okay, wow.
And so it usually, and it's really effective, and it can, and a lot of times the match, if you're talking about a 10% match on a $100,000 project, a lot of people don't have that kind of discretionary money laying around. And sometimes that could be that could be the reason why the project doesn't go forward. And so sometimes it's part of our job is to be trying to create creative ways to generate match.
At the,
Here's the
Jeremy,
Jeremy, here's Jenny.
a couple months ago, it was indicated there'd be some volunteer opportunities here at the preserve. Can you fill us in on any of that?
Yeah, we had a volunteer work day here recently.
I think he's in.
And we're going to plan additional work volunteer days where there's trail work that needs to be done. Really, the organizations, these types of volunteer organizations where it's a volunteer board, really relies on volunteers to get most of everything accomplished. After the preserve's been conveyed, it's going to need annual mowing of the trails. And if the goal of Southern Tier Land Conservancy, one of their goals is to increase public use and outdoor recreational opportunities for the public. But if your trails aren't maintained and somebody goes there and there's weeds up to their waist and they get covered in ticks, so they're not going to come back. So you have to maintain the trails so that the people want to be able to go there and utilize the space, which requires time and energy, and in this case, it's going to require a pretty hefty volunteer presence. So I would definitely like to get your contact information, and next time we have an event, I will certainly reach out.
Yeah. Maybe I was contacted and I may have missed it. I thought I was on the list, but yeah, we'll talk after you're done.
Yeah.
A couple of questions. You mentioned you've got 5 different types of shrubs and 5 different types of trees that interested in what those are. And then secondarily, another question is something like 100-acre, 117-acre wildlife preserve. How much is it like liability insurance for something like that? Because you're opening it up for people to walk on, and you've got snowmobile traffic in the winter, and I mean that's got to be a consideration too, right?
Absolutely. With the snowmobile trail, there's a snowmobile association insurance, so you sign up for their insurance and you're covered through New York State for the snowmobile trail. For the liability insurance that Southern Tier Land Conservancy had to get for the property, it's you'd have to ask somebody. I'm not.
Yeah, but they do have to have it,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the types of
And
shrubs,
a lot of times if you see like a landscape architect do a design, there'll be like 30 species on the list, and I always roll my eyes because it's like, when's the last time you saw Osage orange naturally occurring somewhere? And it's just not a thing. But I see that stuff on lists all the time, and it always blows my mind. So I'm always at 5 shrubs, 5 trees, and you just pick the dominants that are there, and you're just trying to replicate that ecotype that on the property that you're working on, And so with the shrubs, we got blueberry, like I mentioned, low bush and high bush blueberry. We're going to be planting buttonbush and red orange dogwood and silky dogwood. We might probably throw in some arrowwood. Might get to a 6th species. We might not do low bush is tough because of the browse. It really gets hammered, and it doesn't grow above the browse height at any point in its life cycle. So it's always subjected to the browse. So low bush might be one that we might not want to put in there. As far as trees go, there's There's abundance of red maple on the property. There's black cherry. I mentioned there's some shagbark hickory. There's a variety of oak species that are on the property. And then I always like to incorporate at least one evergreen in my design. So one of the best ones is white pine. Or, you could do like a balsam fir or something like that if you're planting in a wetland. And unfortunately with like the hemlock woolly adelgid, we can't plant hemlock anymore. And with the emerald ash borer, we can't plant any ash. And, green ash and black ash are our dominant wetland trees. So that's always a challenge now because those were always kind of my go-to, trees that I used to use, but, red maple. And then, I always like to throw in some early successional stuff too. I like to see, where there's, you're trying to replicate that forest regeneration where you have the variant of shade tolerant species, where you're creating a early successional forest that's going to be the building blocks ultimately to your climax forest species. So you're planting, if you're planting oak or hickory or cherry, you kind of want to have something that's going to be a little bit more faster growing. That's going to establish canopy a little bit faster. So in a riparian area, I would go to cottonwood. And in this area, trembling aspen. If we can plant some early successional habitat for grouse and woodcock, that's going to be where they're going to target that cover type. So if we can, the more different types of cover types we can integrate into the overall plan, then we're going to have more diversity and more habitat diversity. We're going to have more species diversity as a result of the habitat diversity.
What about wetland plants into the wetland itself? Do you do any of that at all?
Not really. It's mostly all seed bank stuff, and it's really incredible to see the seed bank response once you just reestablish the hydro period.
So that just comes in by itself.
Especially most areas that if it was a previous wetland that's been altered, the hydrology's been altered, the hydro period's been altered through ditching or draining in some other way, tile. As soon as you reestablish that hydro period and the hydrology of the soil, it comes back. So you'll see all of those naturally occurring hydrophytic vegetation all just kind of comes in on its own. And a lot of times you'll get like the horsetail and the spike brush and things like that come in on disturbed areas anyway. So if you're building a berm, you're disturbing the soil and it's got any type of soil moisture, that's where you're going to see like the spike brush and the horsetail, which are hydrophytes. That's why those ones, if you're doing a wetland delineation, you always kind of have to take it with a grain of salt because sometimes they are telling you that it's a wetland, it's not, because they just invade disturbed areas sometimes. In the back.
How easy is it to clean equipment when moving from site to site? I know best practice is to try to clean so you're not spreading erosion invasives and stuff. And we've talked about that with things like land trust and things, but I just wondered how easy that is to do as far as to not be transferring the stuff that's in the tires and all that.
Yeah, great question. We power wash on site. Depends on where we can get water. We have a tank that goes in the back of our truck. If we can't get water, I'll pump out of one of my wetlands to power wash equipment if it's full, but a lot of times we're just getting done with construction and there's no water. They're all empty. They haven't filled up yet. So sometimes we'll go to a stream, but if we can't, we put the tank in the back of the truck. We find a water source either at the office or I prefer to pump out of a stream. Fill the tank, bring the tank to the site, and we pump from the tank to our gas power washer and we power wash. But it's definitely one of our practices because that is the number one way that invasives get moved around, unfortunately.
How do you handle knotweed to get rid of it? Because once that's in an area, wow, that dominates and it spreads so quickly. How do you get rid of it? So that the seeds don't come back and regenerate and the roots don't regenerate and all that?
Really tough. Ask Paula.
Market for it. You could cut it down and use it for something.
I gave a presentation many years ago and I was harping on the knotweed, how bad it is. It's one of the dirty dozen. And And I had a person come up to me afterwards and she says, you know, not for nothing, but I'm a honeybee producer. And she goes, my bees love knotweed. And she goes, I love the honey that it produces. So it's like always, never always have glass half empty. But I agree. It's, you know, it's a shame. You know, it's a shame. Same with Phragmites and purple loosestrife, and you know, I see the water chestnut and things that are just a shame. But I have had to manage it at times from a vegetative, like a performance standard at a restoration. You know, any compensatory restoration will have performance standards, and you're not allowed to have 5% aerial coverage of these species, and you list them all. You know, buckthorn and autumn olive and knotweed. And for me, the number one way that I found to get rid of it, because you always can do chemical, but I'm not a proponent of, you know, I think that in our lifetime, glyphosate is going to be considered a carcinogen. It's going to be like DDT. It's going to be banned in our lifetime. So I'm not a big fan of glyphosate, but you can cover it with black plastic. So you cut it off, get rid of, kind of responsibly try to get rid of the plant material, depending on the time of year. You want to get it before it goes to seed, and then cover it with black plastic. And then you got to weigh the black plastic down with soil or mulch or something. And then even then I've come back and I've seen all these black plastic teepees, because it's literally pushing the black plastic up. And it's really tough to manage.
Fire doesn't work? Fire?
You know, my first inclination, I've never done it, but my first inclination would be that fire would make it more, you know, robust. But I don't know. And I think a lot of it is back to our education and outreach that we have is we do talk and we meet with local like highway departments and municipalities, because the worst thing I see is when it's out to seed and then you see some municipality brush hogging it. When it's out to seed, and it's like, why couldn't somebody just inform that person or that highway superintendent that this isn't the time of year to be doing, it's not the right time of year to be doing this, you know? And a lot of that has to just ties back to education and outreach. So that's some of the stuff that we try to do, is we try to educate the folks that are out there that are dealing with that.
You may have mentioned this in the presentation about the snowmobile trail. Is there an easement there? Who created it? Who maintains it?
So it's the Lyle Snowmobile Club, Ridge Runners or something like that.
Do they own it? Have an easement on it? Or
No, nope.
But they're supposed to maintain it?
Yep. They maintain it and they provide the insurance. But other than that, there's nothing legally binding. I could call them up and say trail's done today, but we don't want to do that because we don't want to create any hard feelings.
There's no written document where they will cover the insurance?
Yeah, there's a insurance form that we had to sign and submit to them, and then they submit to the state. And they do, where all landowners, every landowner that's in their trail system has that piece of paper. So all landowners have that as
so right now you have it, but then the STLC will have it.
they'll need to do that, yeah. I was trying to.
Oh, you're trying to get on the internet?
So there's just one other point I wanted to make, and it's best to just show you. So it's up here in Lyle somewhere. I'm gonna see if I can get my bearings here. Edwards Hill Road.
There's a bridge hill. No.
Okay, so here's our impoundment right here.
Okay.
And so a lot of times these projects what I like to think of is in furtherance of a greater conservation goal. So this is a great property, 117 acres, and if nothing ever happens beyond this, that's great. But I've worked with other land trusts before, and a lot of times when you establish a footprint somewhere, there is this snowballing effect where the neighbors start to call, and sometimes it takes a couple of years, word of mouth. Oh, I got this tax reduction for an easement, or I'm interested in conservation too. Now that you have this physical presence here, it makes a lot of sense for me to engage with you because you're already here, foot in the door, right? Just north of this property, just over the hill, is the Lyle Bog.
Oh,
What?
Lyle Bog, B-O-G.
This is a 50-acre floating map. It's the most ecologically important water resource in Broome County.
Wow.
And it's owned by the Pendles. And it's a 500-acre property. And it touches this property right here in the corner.
Okay.
And nothing may ever happen. And it's privately owned. And it's one of a few bogs that are privately owned. You know, it's DEC regulated. They'll never be able to do anything with it, but you see they farm right up to it. Got a lot of nutrients going in there, a lot of things that probably could be improved.
Yeah.
And my grand vision is that someday, at some point in the future, the Pendles will come to the table and want to talk about an easement on their property. And that's when we'll have this more of a contiguous conservation footprint. This 117 acres plus the 500, you know, and still promote working lands and sustainable agriculture, and, you know, try to continue to work with, you know, the existing land use and maybe allow them to continue to hunt there, or, you know, whatever it takes to grease the wheels. But that is 100% part of the calculation.
So just help us out a little. Why is that bog so important? What is it?
Well, just the fact that it's a floating mat, the bogs in that cover type in and of itself is one of the rarest wetland forms of wetlands that there is. I mean, if you were to categorize them, a floating mat bog or a fen, and if the difference is the fen is associated with an open water. That's the only difference. And now in those areas, there are very specific plants that occur there, like the pitcher plant and poison sumac and black spruce. So, and there's a couple other ones, shrubby cinquefoil. And those are species that you don't see, they don't occur anywhere else. And a lot of orchids and stuff. And so it's a super unique ecotype. It's a super unique ecosystem. There's only very rare plants that occur there. And because of that, it's a really high ecological value. I would argue it's one of the highest, probably top 5 highest ecological valued areas in our entire our 22 counties.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what's several feet thick?
I've never walked out on it.
I heard that, I think it was Dick Andrews that was out on it. And if you know Dick?
Yep.
Yeah. But yeah, anyways, go ahead, Paul.
There's another bog in Lyle on the other side over towards Whitney Point, or not in Lyle, but in Whitney Point. It's a lot smaller. And like John Titus.
Maybe it was
Is that
that
the
one.
Landry spot?
Yeah, I think so. And then like John Titus and Julian Shepherd, they know about that one. And this isn't 100% floating mat. There is some open water associated with it. So you could argue it could be called a fen.
What's this?
Yeah, that's a neighbor.
Almost looks like it's a dirt, like they've maintaining dirt in this like weird shape.
Looks like Tennessee.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, it's just a cornfield.
A cornfield, okay.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with the perimeter being marked up like that. It doesn't look like that today. I know that.
Okay.
Anyway, just wanted to show that there, and ultimately, it would be great if this, you know, this footprint expanded and evolved. And sometimes it happens, and sometimes it doesn't, and it's okay if it does, and it's okay if it doesn't.
Point. You go in and establish something like this. you have to take a very long view, and you have to include your human neighbors in your ecology, so to speak. And how are you going to get along with them so that eventually you can bring in more into the land that you preserve? Really, that's the most hardest part of it all, I think.
The social part. I get along better with animals and wetlands. You know, but it's a critical component, and you know, you have to, you know, kind of foster that. You have to put the work in to, you know, develop, if it's a relationship, you know, and sometimes like allowing the snowmobile trail is that those are the things, those are the steps you have to take to you know, to get into good graces. And then, you know, if they can start to see the value of it in the community, in the area, and which takes time, you know, then it could be something that they could say, hey, this might be something that we're interested in talking with you about. And Jason Shaw might get a phone call 2 years from now from one of the Pendles, and they're going to be like, I can't wait for that day.
And it's happening with the Finger Lakes Land Trust.
It happens. It happens all the time.
What was the situation that allowed this first acquisition of this Julian Shepherd Preserve to happen? Did the landowner approach Southern Tier Land Conservancy, or did the Southern Tier Land Conservancy hear from just people talking that, hey, maybe this might be an interesting place because Julian Shepherd mentioned to you that this was a nice wetland to try to work on, or how did this come about?
I identified it. Like I said, I worked there in 2014, and then I saw it was for sale. It was on Zillow. It was on Zillow for 400 days.
Oh.
And so then I just said, hey, we could write a proposal. Here's a property as an example. I was just showing an example. Like, here's a property that I think has good ecological value, has some other things associated with it that are kind of secondary, but also important, like the bog. You know,
Oh, is it the same landowner?
no,
Different, somebody else?
yeah, this was a Walter Wright was his name, and he owned all these fields, and he farmed this whole area. And he since has retired. He lives in Nanticoke, and he's sold off. So like, this is the Gleason Farm, which is a big farm, one of the biggest CAFOs in Broome County is the Gleason Farm. And then you got the Pendles, and then this is all Gleason, and then there's Whitaker. Whitaker's another big dairy, and they have they bought up all of Walt's fields, but nobody wanted to buy this. And the reason why they didn't want to buy it, most people got scared off by the perpetual easement from USDA. They didn't want something with an easement on it. But for a land trust to have an easement on the deed, you know, that's it. There's when you're looking at potentially acquiring a property, you know, you want to look and see what encumbrances are on the deed. Is there a pipeline right away? Is there an overhead power line right away? Is there something, I know, on the deed, some right away to some neighbor that would have access, you know? So those are things you need to know, and those are some red flags. Well, having a conservation easement on a USDA impoundment isn't necessarily a red flag, provided that the dam isn't, you know, a regulated dam. So it all kind of checked out, you know, and I proposed this to Southern Tier Land Conservancy, and that's when they cross-referenced it and realized that it was one of Julian's priority sites. And so then they immediately was like, wow, this is super, you know, a great opportunity, and ultimately why we decided to name it the Shepherd's Preserve was because it was.
You're planning a press conference to announce this to the public, right?
Jason had the news up there. We had Jim Emke up there last year, but I think there's going to be another one.
Good.
They need to do, once we get the kiosk up, I think there's going to maybe be a ribbon cutting.
There you go.
So,
Well, the cooperative extension presentation
Was that?
sort of the first announcement. That's when Julian even found out about it.
That was funny.
That was named after him.
Yeah, I remember.
We've got field trips planned.
Okay, very good.
I got it.
yeah, so if the Sierra Club, if you guys want to have like a on-site place to meet and hike as one of your outings, or the Naturalist Club, You know, there's the parking area. It's open. There's going to be some really nice trails. Bill Bittner, he's a volunteer, really active with Waterman Center. He's been a great resource. He's out there and he's been, you know, identifying the trail locations and doing a lot of the legwork, a lot of the on the ground work. And so we're really thankful to Bill, but you know, we really need more volunteers, like you mentioned.
And I just sent you an email.
Okay, good. Good.
You can look for it whenever.
Good.
Okay. And, but the parking is gonna be limited, right?
More.
Well, you can put 4 in the actual parking area, but you could put 20 cars up and down the road.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Probably not a well-traveled road, so.
Right.
Right.
You know, as long as you
Yeah.
make sure you don't go into a ditch or something.
well, thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, you bet.